Welcome everybody to our free call for permaculture class. Sustainable Kashi is so happy to offer these classes every week to help us all connect with the ecosystems and to help connect us with each other in this time of isolation. We are located in Sebastian, Florida, on an 80-acre retreat center. We're right on the natural beauty of the St. Sebastian River, which is just a beautiful ecosystem of brackish and salt water, fresh and salt water coming together. Here we have 9 demonstration gardens and an off-grid eco-village where we really want to make systems that you can get your hands on to learn how they work and understand them more. So we invite you all to come out and plan a visit sometime in the future when we reopen. Today's class is really important to me. So I have always wanted to grow big veggies in the garden. I'd look at the conventional gardens with their big blemish-free tomatoes, you know, and I'd be like, oh, I want to do that. So I don't think like that anymore. So today I understand the relationships in the ecosystems. And I like to say that the main crop I'm growing here at Sustainable Kashi is community. Honestly, the plants are here just to give us all something to talk about and focus on. So Alex is an active part of the Florida permaculture scene for as long as I can remember. And I'm really grateful to have him here to talk to us about what permaculture is and what it's not. So thank you for being here, Alex.
Thank you for having me.
Take it away.
Okay, right. Okay, so yeah, I'm Alex Odeja. I started permaculture a little bit, my little movement up here a little bit more than about a decade ago. And I had learned all about it sort of accidentally. I had gone to my favorite organic store and the guy said, well, you're buying a book on I guess it was probably like square foot gardening or something like that. Have you ever heard of permaculture? And he told me about Masanobu Fukuoka. And I said, well, say that slowly. And I wrote it down. And I found online the PDF version of his book, One Straw Revolution. And I proceeded to read that. And my mind was just blown and blown and blown and blown. And I said, yeah, we're doing this wrong. So then I found Bill Mollison. I went back to my little organic store and I said, have you ever heard of Bill Mollison? And this is how early it was. Never heard of the guy. So the guy who told me about Masanobu had never heard about Bill Mollison, who had actually co-coined the term permaculture. And I can remember the early days of, like, say, hugelkultur. There was no picture. They just had a description. And I was creating these things by description. And I didn't realize they work really well up north the way they were being described. And down here, they continued to die and die and die, you know, just basically dry up and blow away. And so I just experimented over the course of many years. And eventually I realized one time I had made one above ground, you know, just I was doing them all above ground. I had made a wattle basket weave case around them. I tried to plant into the sides of it. Because, you know, we have just sand. You know, hugelkultur is always described with like rich soil being thrown on top. We don't have that. And it's natural. It's not like we've damaged the soil. It's you know, warm temperate all the way down to the tropics. Basically, the soil never sleeps and it likes to become sand very quickly. So I didn't know that at the time. But what I did was I noticed that some rats had dug a little house underneath the hugelkultur. And so after a year, I used to go and, you know, redo them and try to figure out what was going on. They still grew food. It's not like they didn't. They just weren't great. And I noticed this one had sunk into the ground because the rats kept digging little villages underneath there. And then I realized that all of the stuff that had sunk under the level of the surface of the ground, the natural surface of the ground, was composting, and it was turning into beautiful soil where everything above was just sort of dry as a bone and barely doing anything. And I went, huh, I bet you if I dig these into the ground. So I started digging them down into the ground. And what I didn't realize is I was actually creating a pit garden. So I call them pit hugels, you know? And I realized that, I mean, what was my whole point of that? I could just go to the store, because at the time we were doing lots and lots of organic gardening. But I would go to the store and I'd buy soil, and I'd go to the store and I'd buy fertilizers, and I'd go to the store and buy this and buy the plants and da-da-da-da-da-da, and, you know. And I realized there were a lot of plants that really didn't like to be here unless you were just constantly babying them. And there was always an insect on everything. And I was always fighting everything to get this tiny amount of produce. And even if I got a lot of produce, I realized, you know, the amount of energy that's going into this isn't really creating a surplus. This food that I'm getting, I could have just popped down to my organic store, which luckily we had one. I could just pop down to the organic store and buy this stuff, you know, do a little bit of work for the community, and I get a little bit of cash, and I go and get my organic produce. But the reason I was trying to do this is I kept thinking, one day that store's not going to be there, so I need to learn how to actually grow food. And I need to be able to learn how to grow food with zero money, with everything that's just right here. So so my wife read the book, Introduction to Permaculture, and she told me, why don't you do this on this page? And she showed me literally like half a page in Introduction to Permaculture. And I did that. And that was the same year that I took off to go do an Earthship build. I basically was interning on an Earthship build in Taylor County, Georgia. Well, I had planted my garden with a layered lasagna garden technique that's described in the Permaculture Handbook. And then I came back, well, I say handbook, Intro to Permaculture. I came back after a month, and the garden was not only not dead from never being watered, not full of weeds, but extremely lush. The plants were super tall. Everything was very, very vibrant. And I was just, again, mind blown again. I was just like, I was like I was seeing a god. And I said, I must share this. So I actually found a permaculture group that was nearby, but they basically were just talking about permaculture. And I was like, I want to just keep installing these gardens for people. So I went around and I got names. I went to yoga studios. I went to the Sierra Club meetings, and I just got people to throw names into a hat, and I would pull a name, and we would go to their house and install a layered garden. But what I didn't realize is, you know, if you don't really take care of it, if you don't know how to plant it, and I didn't even know in those days, then wouldn't it be interesting to see if that would go throughout the year? And none of them did. So if you didn't know how to do it, the idea was, how do I get this thing to live throughout the year? How do I get it to reseed itself? How do I get the soil to start building? Because we're in, you know, the South, the deep South. How do I get this to work? I want it to work on the beach, you know, I want this stuff to work. And I can't have people telling me, you know, I can't do it because I can't afford it, or I don't have this or that or whatever. So that's when I started doing hugelkultur. That's when I started learning about, you know, composting in place. That's when I started looking at yard waste day, in quotes. I always call it soil fertility giveaway day. And then basically I would run around and I would bring everybody's leaves and sticks and whatnot to my property and pile them up. And that's when I started learning about the benefits of piles of sticks, which we'll talk about that in a minute here. But then let's just fast forward to today. Nowadays, I can put in a garden. I can walk away from it. I could come back in, you know, 3, 4, 5 years, and there will be food there for me. Will it be the exact same things I planted? Not necessarily all of the things, but a lot of the things will still be there, and I'll have trees making fruit. I've switched from buying nursery trees to buying bare root trees. Bare root trees beat nursery trees to fruit. They grow better root systems, and even though they're tiny when you get them, like I said, they outperform the nursery trees. So I'm very impressed with that. But so what is organic gardening? And I'm not really a versus thing. I mean, I'm more of an organic gardening as compared to permaculture. So permaculture being an entire mindset where organic gardening is, how do I make food with less toxins, fewer toxins? Let's use proper grammar here. So if I'm going to have fewer toxins, am I really worried about more nutrition? I'm not really in organic gardening. However, organic gardening is a huge umbrella too. Some people are absolutely doing permaculture techniques and they're calling it organic gardening and selling it on the market, sure. But some people are calling organic gardening, they're using every pesticide that they can legally use and still call it organic gardening. It's all conventional, the soil's dead, it's all about fertilizing, you know, that kind of thing. So there's a huge spectrum in organic gardening. So does organic gardening fit in permaculture? Sure, it sure does. One of the things I like to point out about permaculture is that permaculture is not hugelkultur. It's not a layered bed. It's not building a house out of adobe. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not these things. It's how and where you do what you do. Does it make sense for your region or for your personal location, like right where you're standing? Does it make sense right there? You know, Terry and I were talking about solar panels and all this other stuff the other day, and it doesn't make sense for everybody. As a matter of fact, it may not make sense for everybody, even if we could ramp it up. It might make more sense for us to build houses that are more efficient. If you're in an Earthship, by the way, you could be in the middle of the desert. You can be 13,000 feet in Tibet. You can be down in Death Valley. It doesn't matter. If you build an Earthship, inside these houses, and I'm not kidding you, I've experienced it myself. I've built them myself. 70 to 71 degrees year round, zero electricity hooked up to this thing. Capturing rainwater. Out in Taos, where they were originally built, 17 inches of annual rainwater, and that was enough rainwater captured on the roofs of these houses for a family of 4 for the entire year. Yes, Earthship as one word.com, and you can go see what I'm talking about. These houses capture rainwater. The whole front of the house is a greenhouse. Not only is it using gray water to grow that greenhouse full of food, it's actually cleaning the air, stabilizing the temperature. The greenhouse fluctuates 10 degrees more than the inside of the house, but the inside of the house, 70 to 71 degrees year round. So very, very amazing little houses. Well, I said to myself, my dream now is to have an Earthship surrounded by a food forest. Can you do that in Florida? Well, I've proven absolutely yes. So we're back to organic gardening. Organic gardening is basically a huge list of things, but most people consider organic gardening to be conventional gardening, conventional farming. Let's just say farming, because, you know, with permaculture and farming, it's like, it's really weird. Permaculture is really large scale gardening. You know what I mean? Even if you're doing it with machines, you're still kind of large scale gardening. So organic gardening is basically using conventional techniques without the benefit of poisons and toxins and garbage that they use. So it makes it a little bit harder, and you get fined by the government in the form of, you know, administration fees and that kind of thing. I call it a fine. I mean, I think it absolutely is a fine. They're not paying you to do it. You know what I mean? You're not getting tax subsidies. So the one side is getting paid to do the stuff we don't want, and the other side is having a fine levied on them for doing what we consider to be the right thing. So I realized, okay, I got to figure out something that's going to work better than organic gardening in Florida. And I'm not saying that it's not a viable part of permaculture everywhere, but it's, you know, it's not wonderful here. And then I started to realize that, oh, and no wonder organic foods are so expensive. They also have to hire people to do paperwork to keep the standard. I mean, it's ridiculous. And the land has to be fallow for 2 years, and you have to not spray it for 2 years before you can declare yourself organic. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that go into becoming an organic farm. And that being said, it could still be less expensive if more people were doing it. So anyway, I realized, okay, I got to figure out something else. My wife was really into exotics. She was growing exotics in a, what would you call it? Like a landscaping technique. You basically go out, throw down a bunch of wood chips and plant exotic perennials in there. And well, this was before I read One Straw Revolution. I'm bouncing around a little bit, but when I read One Straw Revolution, I realized, honey, organic gardening is where you just take a plot of land and you're trying to force vegetables out of it with less toxin and not necessarily more nutrition. However, I would say that you probably do get a little more nutrition out of it because of the things you have to do, you know. But that's not really the focus. But what would be the best nutrition? I'm thinking to myself, the weeds. I mean, if I go out to the weeds, they're growing where they want to be in a non-toxic environment. Yes, we've disturbed the soil, but they do perfectly there. Well, where do these cultivated vegetables come from? Okay, so the cultivated vegetables are basically weeds that we cultivated for certain parts of the plant. And today, none of the vegetables that we eat out of the grocery store today existed 1,000 years ago, is my guess. Or if they did, they were a very different little creature, okay? So then I started to think, well, what are the other things that are edible that grow in the world around us in our climate analogs, you know, the places that are the same. And even though it might be the same temperature, it may not be the same rainfall, it may not be the same soil. So we have to find places that are true climate analogs that have those things. And so I started looking at different varieties of plants to stick into my garden. I started thinking about what kind of soil does this plant want? And then I started to realize I'm moving past organic gardening here. You know, I'm not just forcing things out of a plot of land. I'm actually starting to figure out what's the relationship between the plants and the land. And I'm just the go-between guy. Because if I plug things in that want to be there, like the weeds do, I mean, the weeds just grow. Think about it. Have you ever tried to replant weeds that you found somewhere and you put them in your yard and they just won't grow? That's because your yard isn't what they want. Then I started to learn more and more about the weeds and the medicines and the edibility of them and the things they do for all the plants. My weeds are my companion plants for my vegetables. So I don't go and pull weeds, you know, I manage them, okay? Chop and drop. So permaculture, I'm going to jump back a little bit. We were talking about solar panels and houses and all that. I do these talks and I talk to people and I say, all right, so what is permaculture? You know, and I used to come up with, you know, I used to like read the Bill Mollison definition and I'd say, well, you know, that really doesn't mean a lot to people. It kind of means a little bit, you know, okay, aligning with natural ecosystems, you know, I get that. But why don't we say, what is permaculture in the form of a question? Is a Humvee permaculture or not? Okay, and you think, okay, are solar panels permaculture or not? Is hemp permaculture or not? You see where, okay, you see all these questions and you think, well, they've got to be trick questions, obviously, because why would you ask them like that, right? And then I start to say, it's not necessarily what it is. It's not like you couldn't build a Humvee. And I'm not saying that I'm you know, espousing the whole idea of just run out and buy a Humvee. It's not like you couldn't have a Humvee that was made ethically, that ran on alcohol, perhaps, right? That was actually cleaning the air as it burned this alcohol, because when you burn alcohol, it depends on how you grow it. You may have actually put more carbon and pollution back into the soil and back into plant material. And then when you actually create the alcohol, all those distillates are still full of nutrition. It's almost as if you've taken nothing away except the sunlight that grew them. You put them back in the soil, and now you've got even better soil. So there's an awful lot behind actual ethanol, not the crazy stuff we do with corn, but actual ethanol made from ethically grown plants in a permaculture system. So that's another long story for another day. But if I'm also allowing people to just run out and buy solar, you know, like, you know, utility companies to buy solar panels, there's plenty of evidence that solar panels don't actually save against fossil fuels. Plenty of evidence, and I don't want to get into that. It's another long discussion. But let's just say that solar panels grow on trees. You can just walk up to a tree and pluck it, right? Where do you put that solar panel? Utility companies like to put them in these wide open fields. Well, guess what? They weren't wide open fields at one point. At one point, they were forests. And as you drive down I-10 up here in North Florida and you go out towards Tallahassee area, you see entire areas just like that used to be forest forever, wiped out, and now it's solar panel fields. And one thing that I have learned from as far back as Masanobu Fukuoka, from Bill Mollison, who started out life as a logger, okay? You know, one of the reasons that he was so into trees and plants is that he realized as they logged the forests, he could see the damage. He could see the damage in the waterways. He could see the damage everywhere. It was just insane. So he said, nope, got to change my way. Masanobu was basically an organic gardener, and when he started flying around, he saw the deforestation he hadn't seen in 40 years. He changed his tack to must plant trees, must plant trees. And that's when I realized every single thing that we do to quote unquote improve land requires us to take the trees out. Think about it. People go, well, what about orchards? Well, think about what you've done. You've taken the trees out. And then you put a certain kind of tree in there, and usually a monocrop of a certain kind of tree. Nothing wrong with growing trees. I don't have a problem with that. But that is not a natural ecosystem. I started to realize then one of the biggest differences between permaculture and anything else is that we're not planting plants, we're planting ecosystems. Okay? And then I started to realize, okay, so if you could conceivably make a Humvee that is actually improving the world as you drive it, and then you could actually make a case that solar panels can be good or bad, and that hemp, you know, I would see this meme that would go around. There's a guy logging what looks like old growth forest, and it's a really old picture, and it's like, you know, and oh, it's horrible. And then this beautiful field of hemp. I'm like, oh, but where are the trees? Right? So unless we are taking, like, say, tobacco or some other crop that we don't want anymore, and we're putting hemp in there, we're just cutting down more forest. You see, we're still on that whole tact of forests have to die for us to make money or for us to live. So another big difference between organic gardening and permaculture, and I love this one. It was Bill Mollison had this thing. He said, plant 12 trees, and he said in 30 minutes, which I feel like it takes at least a couple hours to plant a tree. But plant 12 trees in 30 minutes and feed yourself for 100 years. And of course, if you're doing it right, forever, right? You know, forever. And he was pointing out that you could plant trees in an ecosystem. the different 7 to, so it's debatable, 9 layers, and I go with a 9 layer of a forest. The idea was that you could plant these trees in an ecosystem and they would live and they would produce edible leaves, fats, oils, proteins, flour, fruit. I always have to remember the last one. Oh yeah, fruit. Okay. This food could feed people forever, and you've planted a forest system. If you're a meat eater, silvopasture. So now you've got the animals, because by the way, think of all the main meats that are eaten by Americans, or actually people throughout the world. Cows, they are actually forest dwelling animals. They're not really field dwellers. They'll go in they do well in a field, but they're even better in a forest, and mostly on the edge of a forest. If you haven't ever heard of permaculture before, edge is another 4-hour conversation, okay? It has to do with conflict, but at the same time, how does conflict grow into something wonderful? How does conflict turn into something bad? That's the movement between elements in a permaculture design system, and we're getting into that in a second. Chickens, forest-dwelling animals. Pigs, forest-dwelling animals. You see what I'm talking about? So why do we keep chopping forests out to grow these things? These same farmers could be growing massive amounts of tree-based food and have the animals running in there in their perfect environment. So I'm saying to myself, forests are not the enemy, guys. It's the way we're producing the food. It's been proven that if you grow enough grain to create flour on an acre of land versus trees creating nuts that can be ground into flour, you actually get at least the same amount without having to cut down the trees. Well, you may have had to cut down the trees to put the nut trees in the ecosystem, but you get that. There are people in England. This is not the most productive food production system in the world. It's not bad. If you know what you're doing, it's great. There are people in England, excuse me, that do what they call forest gardening technique. And the forest gardening is basically a food forest. And they grow enough food to feed 10 people per acre in England. That's an awful lot of food. When you consider 1 person per 3 acres, supposedly, in our conventional system. It's debatable from 1 to 3 acres, you know. At the same time, they're not losing the 2,500 pounds of carbon to the air every year as per acre as a conventional system. They're actually gaining massive amounts. And I'm not a carbon guy, okay? Don't hate me. I don't believe that carbon is the problem. I look at other greenhouse gases like, say, water vapor as being one of the bigger problems. And why is there so much water vapor, and why is it not sequestered into plants, namely trees? And why is it not being put back into the soil where it actually recharges aquifers, namely trees that do that job? It's because we keep chopping out the trees and we leave the fields open even when we're not using them. Bamboo's another, we were talking about bamboo earlier. Bamboo's another amazing one. I don't know if you guys know it, but I'm the guy that created, with Paul Wheaton, I created the permaculture polka deck, the permaculture playing cards. One of our kings was bamboo, specifically because, you know, it grows so well. Another one of the great cards was basically a weed called the black locust tree. These are plants that just could revolutionize the world if we would, you know, but they're scary because they grow so fast and they grow well and they spread themselves very well. It's all about management. I'd much rather have to manage the how is it put, manage the abundance than having to constantly try to coax something out of the soil. So let me manage the abundance instead of constantly, if you saw my yard, I should probably move the camera around. My yard is a wild food production system. The city would have heartburn just driving by here. And they've left me alone after the last 5 or 6 years. At first I was getting yellow tags constantly, you know, you can get away from it. So permaculture, I have a thing I've written out on Facebook. In my group, it's Permaculture Jacks. And I talk about the differences between organic gardening and permaculture. And one of the main points is that permaculture is not gardening, it's a design science. So it's not that I put hugelkultur in or layered garden. It's not that I planted a fruit tree. It's where did I put it? Why did I put it there? I see people creating, and I'm not going to put anybody down for even doing it. I mean, look, consider it practice. If you put in a banana circle at the top of a hill, why did you put a banana circle at the top of the hill? It's going to be constantly dry. Banana is a grass, it's a monocot. It wants sunlight, water, and fertility. And now it's in the driest, sandiest, not wettest part, right, of the hill. So the question is where do you put a banana circle? Well, you find a place where there's runoff water, excess water, and you put it there. You put it in a place where you can throw your compost in the middle of this banana circle. It's mainly a pit garden again. That's when all of a sudden the banana circle becomes permaculture. And then you have it on a path between two houses so that you're constantly looking at it and you see, oh, there's fruit. Now you pick the fruit. And somewhere along that path is another garden where you can throw the peel. Or maybe that's your compost pile. So you see how I've tied the path into where I plant, and now I don't have I don't have to walk in my path through slogging water because the banana circle's sucking it up. Now I have food, I have a dry path, I have a great water reclamation place. I have a lot of compost happening. I have another compost pile, and then I start building little gardens along my path, and now I've got a zone 1 that leads from one house to the next. You see how this is an energy conservation program? Permaculture could be thought of as true accounting, literally bean counter accounting. Okay. Organic gardeners kind of do that too. I'm not saying they don't, but in permaculture, it is everything you do. If I'm going to buy compost, I have to know where it came from, what energy was put into that compost. If I have a pet dog, am I feeding it off my property? Or am I buying food from somewhere else? What's the damage being done somewhere else? Then when I buy this thing, we actually had this conversation, Terry, a little bit yesterday too. When I buy something, I am now taking responsibility for it. If I throw it away, where is it going? In permaculture, you have to know where it's going. See, this isn't really a part of organic gardening so much. With organic gardening, and again, not putting it down, with general business, because honestly, if you're a great business mind, permaculture really makes sense to you, okay? If I'm into just say producing organic food, I'm looking at how much do I have to buy the stuff that comes into the operation, boom, the operation, how efficient is it? That's where it gets kind of permaculture-y. And then where it goes, I don't really care, as long as there's money in the bank and I can keep doing this. And I'm producing food, and it's better food. I mean, it's nothing wrong with that. Now, when you put organic gardening inside of permaculture, you start creating your own compost. And then you start creating the food that's the easiest to grow in your climate that people will buy. You start teaching them how to feed it, how to eat it, how to prepare it, how to use it, opening their minds to better foods. And then everything that comes out, everything that runs off your property, all the extra compost and things that didn't make it, everything, how you harvest it, how you use energy, all of that bears into the program. And according to Bill Mollison, there is theoretically zero, and he means this, zero limit to the productivity of a system beyond that of the imagination of the designer. Okay, so everything that I'm saying, you think, well, that seems a little, that might be a little convoluted, that might be a bit, it isn't. Actually, I'm giving you the easy stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit of my my little letter here on my Facebook page. So my Facebook page is Permaculture Jax, J-A-X. As far back as this town's been called Jacksonville, J-A-X has been the shortened version of it. And I didn't want to have Permaculture Jacksonville because it's so much to type. So Permaculture Jax says, in permaculture, not gardening, but a design science. Unlike organic gardening, conventional growing, but using less toxic chemistry. The planting of things depends on a list of conditions. Your land or garden has dry spots, moist spots, full sun, shade, part shade. You have varieties of plants that you want to grow, but you now have a list of things to consider. What climate is this plant cultivated for? What is the insect pressure in my area? Because you have to realize that the insects, people come to me all the time. Most of what I get a lot of times is, how do I get aphids off of my tomatoes or whatever? And I say, well, you have to figure out how to bring in more insects. That gives people a little bit of heartburn. In permaculture, before you plant the first seed, you have to think about what conditions are around for my soil. Is it the perfect place for the weeds or your cultivated plants? Is it perfect for grasses like corn or trees? You know why that's a very, very loaded question too? I say loaded, it has a lot of things in it. A question like that is, what kind of soil grows trees and what kind of soil grows vegetables? Has anybody ever thought about it? Because you always hear people say, well, I planted a tree and I surrounded it with leguminous plants, herbaceous plants like beans and peas and things like that. And you say, oh, well, I mean, that's going to fix nitrogen. So that's what they want, right? That's what they want. Has anyone ever actually talked to you about the idea that there are different kinds of nitrogen? Nitrogen being nitrates, which come out of herbaceous plants, or ammonium, which comes out of fungal systems. So does your tree want nitrates or ammonium? It turns out they actually don't want the nitrates so much. Does it hurt them? No, it probably doesn't. But what they want is ammonium. They want fungus. And what does fungus live on but dying wood? So if you're in a forest, what's mostly around but rotting wood? So it makes sense that, and this is something that Jeff Lawton said a long time ago that really stuck with me. He says that the forest grows on a dead forest. So basically the trees fall and they fall and the new trees come out and the new trees come out and they fall, and it's all fungal. It's just amazing. When you get, 10 yards into a forest, it's fungal, okay? When you get 10 yards into a field, it's bacteria, okay? Bacteria thrive on nitrates, fungus thrives in ammonia. Or creates, actually that's not that they thrive on it, they thrive on the material that creates ammonium and nitrates, right? So when I want to grow fruit trees, believe it or not, I need a little bit of both, but it needs to be fungal dominated. So this is why we surround trees with wood chips a lot of times. And there's nothing wrong with that. You see people in landscaping do it all the time, but we don't do it in our gardens. People, you see them to this day, permaculturists planting trees and scraping away all the grass because the guy at the nursery said to do that. Well, by the way, grass actually does compete with a tree for the top, because trees' feeding root system is on the surface, first 18 inches of that surface, right? Well, the grass goes and eats that up. So you don't really want to have grass in there. Well, what do you want? The ecosystem that is beneficial to a tree. So if I want an ecosystem that's beneficial to a tree, I've got to get down a bunch of wood chips. And then I have to plant woody herbs and woody, like little bushes and shrubs. And those bushes and shrubs can get pretty big. So maybe you go out and you trim them. Now, why do you have to trim them? Another permaculture genius, Sepp Holzer, a real hippie living in the Austrian Alps, he said, if you don't have animals to do the job they do naturally, then you have to do that work. And he's right. So because we don't have ruminants in there gnawing away at the bottoms of trees and eating the shrubs and leaving little manure packages, then it's your job to actually do that. All right, so now I'm going to move on. If I compost for a tree system, I have to compost a lot of wood. I have to compost leaves, bushes, shrubs, branches, logs, wood chips. I have to compost that stuff so that I can get the material and I can get the ammonium, I can get the fungal net going that I'm going to put into my garden. Or I could plant hugelkultur on contour, which does two things. It's already going to be very fungally dominated, and it's going to capture the water that's needed. Okay, so when we talk about microorganisms in the soil, which actually create the fertility, this is why you don't need to run down to the store and buy fertilizer, is that if you have set the table for microorganisms, and I'm telling you there's a lot of them, and there's even some macroorganisms, when you actually set the table for them, you need to create a place where there's not too much water, where there's a lot of organic matter, where they have the ability to stay cool or stay warm in the winter. So under a tree, you have both those conditions. Tree actually stabilizes the environment. Okay, which by the way, in a broader sense, that's how climates actually come around. Look at Willie Smits. Willie, normally spelled Willie. Smits sounds like Smith without the T, without the H. Willie Smits, TEDx. Look at his TEDx. He recreated a rainforest for the orangutans, but it turned out that he recreated a natural environment that actually increased the rainfall and it moderated the temperature to the point where now he's got a rainforest back that is perfect for human beings and for the animals at the same time. So when you are creating a hugelkultur on contour, you're capturing the rainwater, you're keeping erosion from happening, but you're also holding moisture in the landscape longer. In Florida, it pretty much captures and then sinks straight down. So don't expect a whole lot, downhill from a hugelkultur in our sandy soil. But if you plant it up with trees right next to the hugelkultur, they create that. They hold onto the soil, they keep it in the surface, and eventually you have amazing things happening. If you want to grow a lot of vegetable plants, you're going to want a bacterial-based system, but not two, because weeds grow beautifully in bacteria. Forests grow beautifully in fungus. okay, in fungal dominated systems, not just bacteria, bacterial dominated, fungal dominated systems. Grass grows perfectly in the middle of both, so equal amounts. Fruit trees are a little bit more fungal and vegetables are a little bit more bacterial. And that is that's basically the way to look at how you're composting or how you're setting up your soil for your gardens, okay? All right, so where were we? Then you have to start to thinking about insect varieties that you can invite into the garden. Yes, invite. Predators and other insect balancers like lizards will keep the insect populations managed. Think about the fact that a healthy plant actually defends itself from quite a few things. This means that soil health is a big part of insect management. So like if I lay a bunch of piles of branches out around my garden, that's where the lizards are gonna live. It's cooler in there, it stays more moist in there, it protects them from their predators, the birds. And then when the conditions are right, they run out into the garden and they just chomp away at all the insects that are trying to eat your garden. So doesn't it make sense to have a little bit more of a dirty little garden, right? A little not so tidy garden, I want to say. A dirty garden. That's crazy. It sounds like Ruth's shout. You need to keep roots in the ground, all of the ground. You shouldn't seed the ground. I have to say this all the time because people think they don't understand what I'm saying when I say it has to be densely planted. They think every 8 inches. I'm like, no, every inch, okay? If you are doing the right thing to the soil, and I have proven this over and over and over again, you can literally just soak a bunch of seeds, grab them all up out of the water, and then just throw them on your soil or on your hugelkultur, which is generally how I do it. And then you just throw a little bit of hay over the top of all of this, and boom, so much food that it looks like a chia pet. And your only job is to thin it by eating it, okay? And by the end of the season, when all the plants are really large, you've thinned out most of them just by eating them. And then you have a whole garden full of food still. You can't eat this garden fast enough. And it's the plants, the roots, the microorganisms, the retention of moisture, the coolness or the warmth of the system that's making this thing happen. It's the fertility, it's everything. It's the insect balance, everything. So that's not organic gardening, but you can call it organic gardening. That's really thinking about permaculture. I'm thinking about how does everything work? What is the answer? Okay, so perennials last all year and become the hosts to predator insects. Annuals bring a variety of microbes and chemical compositions to your soil. They work well together. Leave wasp nests and build piles of sticks. Lizards love piles of sticks to hide from their predators. Mulberry and other berry trees and shrubs along the perimeter of your yard bring in the birds. Some that like high nests and others that like low nests. So you need that habitat for all of them. Birds eat lots of herbivore bugs. They can even eat your fruit, but you've just fed them with those trees, right? And we love birds and we love their little gifts they bring us. What happens if you build a tiny pond? You've got to keep that water moving. You got to keep it moving from going stagnant, but you have dragonflies and frogs nearby to help manage your garden's insects. Other great things happen. I mean, you've got snakes too, but you have to be a responsible human being. You can't just freak out about snakes. Other great things happen even in a tiny water garden. Plant water-based foods that you'll be eating from there too. Water, shallow water is the most productive soil creating system, and it creates the most food out of any system that you can think of. I'm thinking chinampas. I'm thinking, basic water gardens with Keng Kong, which is an Impomie family member in the sweet potato family. No potatoes, just leaves. Thinking about Chinese water chestnuts. Think about the things that can grow on the surface. It's amazing how productive water-based systems are. Supposedly 3 times more productive than land-based food production systems, acre by acre. So anyway, I'm running out of time. I'm gonna go past this, but if you wanna read this whole article, it's pinned at the top of my Permaculture Jack's Facebook page. I also have a YouTube channel called Starwalker Project. There's a long story behind the name, but it's legit. I didn't just make it up. The Starwalker Project. And I hope that you can come out and talk more about all this stuff. There's a never-ending supply of this. I always looked at permaculture as just watching nature, which makes it very simple. Just watch nature and do that. But it is the most simple thing you could possibly ever do to produce food that will take the rest of your life to learn. That's it.
Wow.
If you ask any questions, you just let me know.
Alex, you are an inspiration. It is so wonderful to hear you speaking and sharing your knowledge, your breadth of knowledge. Thank you for everything, especially those permaculture cards. I enjoy playing them so very much.
Yeah.
I like the Alex card. Very, very well done in there.
Sure, thank you. Thank you.
I do have one question that I want to ask, just because I'm interested, and it was asked on what your thoughts are on Earthships here in Florida, and I think it's really perfect to demonstrate the relationships to location. So it's
Right.
really so I'd love for you to answer that.
Yeah. So Earthships in Florida, the problem with an Earthship in Florida would be humidity. Okay, that's the only thing, because you can pound sand into a tire just like you can either. They built them on the beaches in Puerto Rico. They've built them in Haiti. So it's not a matter of will they work, it's how do you get them to work. So just like permaculture, there's not one solution. Even with government, we were talking about government, you can't just have a government that says one solution for the entire country, because that's not the way it works, right? So in permaculture, you look at every situation. I'm on a piece of land. What is the temperature? What is the average amount of water? What am I dealing with soil-wise? How do I build this? So why do we build the same house everywhere? I mean, literally, it's the same house everywhere. These houses, by the way, if you do a little bit of research into history, are what the Romans built. We haven't really changed it. We just added machines that make it more livable in certain climates. But get rid of those machines. How are you going to build your house? So an Earthship, how do you manage the humidity? So think about this. If I've got hot air entering into a system and it cools, what happens to that moisture in the air? It's basic physics. It's called condensation. The temperature change causes the water to fall out. It works the other way too. If it goes from cooled out to warm and there's a lot of moisture in the air, the water will fall out. Go into a greenhouse. Most of the time, it's raining on you in that greenhouse because of the temperature change from the outside to the inside. Greenhouses are humid environments. Well, so how would you do that? Well, in an Earthship, the whole front of the house is a greenhouse, but the air that flows through it goes from the house to the greenhouse, not the other way around. So you're not going to benefit that way. But in an Earthship, you're running conduits, not conduits, culverts. So a big pipe that usually moves water through a berm. It starts out hot or cold. It comes through the berm and it changes temperature very quickly, like within 30 feet. And it's being sucked through the house by condensation because the greenhouse on the front of the house is higher than the rest of the house and hotter than the rest of the house. So it pulls the air up. All you have to do is open vents. It pulls the air through the house, pulling out of the house, pulling the cool air through the berm, or the cool or the warm. Let's say the stabilized air, because once it gets into the house, it's like 70 degrees. Well, if I take my culverts and I tilt them like this, as the air moves up the culvert, the moisture will fall out. I've got a Band-Aid. The moisture will fall out and it will drain back out of the culvert. Now, that's not enough. So what do they do in the Mediterranean to keep the corks on their bottles? By the way, this is something I know that I haven't been able to share with the Earthship people yet. We'll see if it works. They have to keep their relative humidity in wine shelters at 40%, which, by the way, is the perfect for human health. 40% humidity. You don't want to be too dry. You pass viruses and you dry out and things aren't great. You don't want to be too humid because then you start getting funguses and, and then you start all kinds of other issues, lung issues, Legionnaire's disease, and all these different things. So 40% humidity is perfect for us, right? So what do? They pack the walls of their stone cellars with clay. Basically, it's cob, but they mix in 50% charcoal. Now remember, charcoal is not biochar, it's charcoal. But after you have walls that stay moist, they start absorbing moisture, they become biologically stable. So now even when you touch a wall, even if you have bad bacteria on your hands, the wall absorbs that and actually neutralizes it. So now you have probiotic walls that actually keep the contents, the corks inside that wine cellar at 40 degrees relative humidity. Now, why haven't we tried that in an Earthship yet? That's what I'm working on right now. I'm literally just about to put the roof on my root cellar. Okay. Now, I live in an area where I'm allowed to build anything I want, 200 square feet and smaller, no permit, and I can live in it. So that does exist. And I'm basically in the southernmost tip of Georgia, but I'm basically in Florida. It's the same sand, it's the same climate, it's everything, right? And as far as building an Earthship in Florida, yes, there's one down in Bradenton, or it's around that area. It's just a matter of they wanted to know what is the wind rating and all that kind of stuff. An Earthship can take a hurricane like it's nothing. A direct hit from a tornado might damage an Earthship, but it'd have to hit a specific way. You can't hit the berm, it'll bounce right over the thing. So these are storm resistant, if not proof, okay? they take as much water, and if you can handle the humidity, you're done.
Love it. And as much as I'd love to just let you talk for hours, Alex,
Can you
tell us one more time where to get in touch with you?
Okay, so I have a group on Facebook called Permaculture Jacks, or my name on Facebook is Alexander Ojeda. That's how you pronounce my last name. The Starwalker Project on YouTube is where I put my videos. And I'm not looking for clicks. I'm not trying to get people to subscribe so I can make lots of money. What I'm trying to do is I put out really boring videos for people, and everything that I've got out there is how to grow food, how to keep yourself healthy, how to create your own medicines, da-da-da-da-da. And nobody really cares about that stuff. So so we're in a small group. If you care about that stuff, sign up. Please subscribe, because it does help me to get the word out to more people, you know. But we'll see how that goes.
Thank you for all the work you do.
Absolutely.
Alex has graciously donated a free consultation to one person who answers a question in our Facebook community group. And that is, what was your biggest takeaway from this class? You have quite a few to choose from. And so it's really exciting. It gives us a way to talk to each other, and we'll keep the conversation going. So any of these questions that you have, please post them in the Facebook group, and they're a lot easier to answer. I want to thank Amy Zelt for keeping us going on the production line. I know it's hard to keep all these signals running, and the call is very sweet. Thank you so much. If you got something out of the call, feel free to donate it. What pays for this Zoom line. If you got anything out, feel free, but these classes are free and they're there for you. So if you can't donate, that is fine. We are going to edit this video and post it up on our YouTube channel. So Alex will send you a copy of that if you want to share it out. I know people will get some wonderful information out of this.
Thank you.
Next week, we have Eric Lewis up from Maryland. He's going to be talking to us about the Yoga of Permaculture. So that's going to be really exciting. And we're all planting seeds of abundance right now together. We're not only in our gardens, but in our communities. You know, we are companion planting with each other in our neighborhoods, and we're stacking functions with our passions. And permaculture is not just gardening. Permaculture has always given me a way to see the big picture. And when I get to know my farmer, I realize it's more about relationships and less about tomatoes. I get to learn how I can plug into the ecosystem around me, and I find myself thriving more as the community around me thrives. So thank you all for joining us today on this important topic, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Bye, everybody. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That was incredible.
I appreciate it. Grow yourself out of this mess.
Oh, beautiful.